For 8 months, my wife's wedding ring sat in a velvet box on my nightstand. Every night I held it. Every night, I whispered her name. Then one December morning, I carried it to Frank Bellini's shop on Armitage Avenue. He had crafted that ring 4 decades ago for the woman I loved. When he examined it under the light, he went pale. He locked the door and said, "Martin, your sons did this. Don't go home. I am grateful you chose to spend your time here. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know who is walking this journey with me." Some elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any similarities to real names or places are coincidental. What matters most is the lesson we take from it. Those words, "Your sons did this," landed somewhere between my ribs and never left. But before I tell you what Frank found inside that ring, before I explain what my sons had done and why a 71-year-old jeweler locked his shop in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, I need to take you back. Back to the silence. Back to the house on Maple Street in Lincoln Park, Chicago, where everything still smelled like Diane and nothing made sense without her. Diane passed on April 15th, 2024. The doctors called it acute renal failure. They used words like sudden and unexpected, and sometimes these things happen. They handed me pamphlets about grief counseling while her body was still warm in that hospital bed. I signed the paperwork. I drove home alone. And for 8 months after that morning, I existed without actually living. The house held her everywhere. Her gardening gloves still hung on the hook behind the kitchen door, the leather cracked and soil-stained. Her bonsai tree sat on the windowsill above the sink, the one she had shaped and trimmed for 15 years, still alive, still leaning toward the glass as if reaching for the sun she used to let in every morning. Her recipe binder lay open on the counter to a page for minestrone soup. The margins filled with her neat handwriting, little adjustments she had made over decades. A pinch more basil. Martin likes it thicker. I could not bring myself to close that binder. Closing it felt like agreeing she was gone. Our sons came and went during those months. Ryan, 44, my eldest, a construction manager for a firm downtown, stopped by most Sundays. He would stand in the kitchen with his hands in his pockets, scanning the room like he was appraising a property rather than visiting his father. He asked about the house, about the trust, about whether I had thought about my future. I mistook his questions for concern. Jason, 38, my younger boy, a senior accountant at a mid-size firm in the Loop, came less often but called every few days. His voice always carried that careful, measured tone he had picked up somewhere in his 20s, as if every sentence had been rehearsed before he spoke it. He asked about paperwork, about Diane's accounts, about whether I needed help organizing her financial records. I mistook his attention for love. Every night I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the velvet box on my nightstand. Diane's wedding ring caught whatever light the room offered, and I turned it slowly between my fingers. I could feel the years inside that band. Our first apartment on Taylor Street. Sunday mornings at Rose's Bakery, where she would order the same almond biscotti and laugh when I got powdered sugar on my coat. 39 years of Christmases, arguments about thermostat settings, slow dances in the kitchen when she thought nobody was watching. I held the ring and whispered her name. Diane. As if saying it often enough might keep her from fading. December came hard that year. The kind of Chicago winter that sits on the city like a weight, pressing everything gray and flat. Snow had fallen overnight, and the streets in Lincoln Park were lined with the tracks of people who had moved through the cold and disappeared. I woke that morning and opened the velvet box again. The ring was there, solid, waiting. Something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way the pale winter light caught the diamond. Maybe 8 months of grief had simply collected enough momentum to move me. I noticed for the first time that the diamond looked different, that it caught light in a way I did not remember. A subtle thing, the kind of detail only someone who had held that ring every single night for 8 months would notice. Frank Bellini would know. He had set that diamond 40 years ago in his shop on Armitage Avenue, A narrow storefront, wedged between a Thai restaurant and a vintage record shop. Frank's family had been jewelers for 3 generations. Italian immigrants who brought their craft from Naples. He had made our wedding bands by hand, working with 22-karat gold because Diane wanted warmth, not flash. She said cold metal had no soul. I dressed, slipped the ring into my coat pocket, and drove through the snow-quiet streets. The shop bell chimed when I entered. The smell hit me first. Metal polish, old wood, the faint sweetness of the cleaning solution Frank used on gemstones. The space was small and warm, cases of rings and watches glowing under soft lamps. Every surface worn smooth by decades of careful hands. Frank looked up from behind the counter. He was 71 now, thinner than I remembered, his white hair combed neatly to one side. His hands, once the steadiest I had ever seen, trembled slightly at rest. But the moment they held a piece of jewelry, they became precise again. The craft lived in his fingers like muscle memory. Martin. His face softened when he saw me. It had been months. Come in. Come in. Sit down. How are you holding up? I placed the velvet box on the counter between us. I want you to look at something, Frank. I think the diamond looks different. I do not know why. Maybe I am imagining things. He opened the box carefully, the way he handled everything, with reverence. He lifted the ring and held it beneath the overhead light, rotating it slowly. Then he reached into his drawer for a jeweler's loop and brought the ring close to his right eye. For a few seconds, he said nothing. His breath fogged the metal slightly. Then his hand stopped moving. His loop came down. He placed the ring on a black velvet pad and stared at it. The color left his face. Frank? He did not answer. Instead, he walked to the front door, flipped the open sign to closed, pulled the shade down over the window, and turned the deadbolt with a click that echoed through the small shop. When he turned back to me, his eyes held something I had never seen in 40 years of friendship. Fear. He reached beneath the counter and opened a drawer I had never noticed. From inside, he pulled a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. My name written on the front in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. Diane's handwriting. Martin, Frank said quietly, his voice barely steady. Diane came to me 5 months ago. She gave me this envelope and told me something I have carried every day since. She said, if I do not come back, make sure Martin finds what is inside the ring. The shop felt smaller. The walls pressed closer. I stared at the envelope, at my wife's familiar script, at the letters of my name formed by a hand that no longer existed in this world. Frank placed the ring under his magnifying lamp and leaned close. Then he said the words that split my life into before and after. Martin, this is not the diamond I set 40 years ago. Your wife replaced it. And I think I know why. Frank reached beneath the magnifying lamp and adjusted the focus until the ring filled the entire viewing field. He gestured for me to look. I leaned in, my heart beating in a place it had no business being, somewhere between my throat and the roof of my mouth. Under high magnification, the diamond looked wrong, not to someone passing by a jewelry case, not to someone glancing at a hand across a dinner table, but to a trained eye, under proper light. The structure was off, the facets refracted cleanly, but the internal pattern was too uniform, too precise, lacking the natural imperfections that define a genuine stone. This is lab-grown, Frank said quietly. Synthetic. Your wife had me set this stone 5 months ago. She came in alone on a Wednesday afternoon, asked me to remove the original diamond and replace it with this one. I asked her why. She said she needed to hide something inside it, something small enough that nobody would think to look. I straightened up. The room tilted slightly. Hide something? Frank picked up a pair of fine-tipped tweezers and positioned them against the edge of the synthetic stone. With the care of a surgeon, he worked the setting loose and lifted the stone from the band. Then he placed it under a secondary light, a blue-toned UV lamp that revealed what the naked eye could never catch. Inside the synthetic diamond, suspended in the center, like an insect trapped in amber, was a tiny rectangular object, no larger than a grain of rice. It was encased in a thin layer of transparent resin, sealed perfectly within the artificial crystal. A micro SD card, Frank said, embedded during the fabrication process. Whoever made this stone built it specifically to contain this. It is not something you can buy. It was custom engineered. Diane had a friend, I murmured, almost to myself. A materials engineer at Northwestern University. They had worked on a community project together years ago, something involving recycled glass for a public art installation. Diane had mentioned her a few times, always with admiration for the woman's precision. She could build you anything, Diane had said once over dinner. Anything at all. Down to the molecular level. Frank nodded slowly. Diane told me the same thing. She said her friend could create a stone that looked flawless under casual inspection, but would reveal its secret only under the right magnification. A locked room disguised as a diamond. He set the stone on a black cloth and began carefully dissolving the resin shell with a solvent designed for delicate gemwork. The process took several minutes. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of the chemical reaction and the muted hum of traffic on Armitage Avenue outside. When the resin cleared, Frank lifted the micro SD card with tweezers and placed it on a clean white surface. It sat there, impossibly small, impossibly heavy, with whatever it carried. I stared at it. Diane had hidden this inside her wedding ring. The ring she wore every single day. The ring she twisted nervously when she was thinking. The ring she removed every night and placed on the nightstand next to mine. She had been carrying a secret against her skin for weeks, and I had never known. Frank set the card down and reached again beneath the counter. This time, he produced the sealed envelope, the one with my name in Diane's handwriting. He placed it beside the card. She came to me 4 times, Martin. 4 visits in the last month of her life. I looked up. 4 times? The first time was March 20th. She asked me to replace the diamond with the synthetic stone. She was calm, composed, but her hands were trembling. She said she needed to hide data somewhere no one would ever think to search. I did not ask questions. Diane was not the kind of woman who asked favors without good reason. He paused, rubbing his thumb across the edge of the counter, the way people do when they are summoning the courage to continue. The second visit was March 28th. She brought the micro SD card with her, said she had recorded something important and needed it sealed inside the stone. I did the work while she waited. She watched every step. When it was finished, she held the ring up to the light and smiled. But it was not a happy smile, Martin. It was the kind of smile a person wears when they have accepted something terrible. My chest ached. I could see her doing exactly that, holding the ring up, turning it slowly, the light moving across the surface, the same way I had held it every night for 8 months. The third visit was April 5th. She asked me to check that the card was still secure, that the resin had not degraded. It had not. She seemed more anxious that time. She kept looking toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in. Before she left, she handed me the envelope and said, "Keep this somewhere safe. If something happens to me, Martin will need it." Frank's voice dropped. He looked at me directly. The fourth time was April 12th. 3 days before she passed. She came in late, just before closing. She looked exhausted, thinner than I remembered, her skin slightly gray. She said, "Frank, if I do not come back, if I do not walk through that door again, promise me you will wait. Wait for Martin to bring the ring. He will bring it eventually. He is sentimental that way. He will want to have it cleaned or appraised or simply looked at because it reminds him of me. When he does, show him what is inside. And give him the envelope." She paused at the door. Then she said, "And Frank, please tell him I am sorry. Tell him I wanted to explain everything myself. I just ran out of time." The silence in the shop was absolute. I could hear my own blood moving. I could hear the snow outside falling against the window, a sound so faint it should have been impossible. But grief sharpens your ears for quiet things. I picked up the envelope. My fingers traced the letters of my name. Diane had held this paper. Her hands had pressed this seal. Whatever she had been carrying alone, she had left me a path to find it. I looked at the micro SD card lying on its white surface. Then at Frank. "Can you open it?" He nodded and pulled a laptop from beneath the workbench. It was old, scratched, the kind of machine a man keeps because it still works, and he sees no reason to replace what functions. He inserted the card into a reader and typed the password Diane had written inside the envelope. The screen loaded. A file directory appeared. 6 video files, 3 audio files, 1 document, all dated between March 28th and April 14th, 2024. The month Diane died. Frank looked at me. His hand rested on the mouse, hovering over the first file. It was labeled Kitchen, March 28th, 7:04 a.m. "She told me she was gathering evidence," he said carefully. "She would not tell me against whom. She made me promise not to tell you unless something happened to her." His eyes glistened. I did not know what she had recorded, not until right now. But looking at this, looking at these dates, I think we both know this was not about strangers. The cursor blinked on the screen. The first video waited. I nodded once, and Frank clicked play. The video opened with a shaky half-second of darkness before the image stabilized. Then my kitchen appeared on screen, and something inside me lurched. Not because it looked different, because it looked exactly the same. The granite counter Diane had chosen when we renovated in 2012. The ceramic backsplash tiles she had picked from a small shop in Pilsen. The wooden knife block I had built for our 30th anniversary. The blender she used every evening to prepare her vegetable juice for the following morning. And on the windowsill above the sink, centered in the frame, as if the entire shot had been designed around it, sat Diane's bonsai tree. 15 years she had shaped that tree. 15 years of trimming and wiring and turning the pot a quarter rotation every Sunday so the growth stayed even. She spoke to it sometimes when she thought I was not listening. Little encouragements, as if the tree were a child learning to stand. The camera was inside the bonsai. I understood it instantly. The angle, the height, the unobstructed view of the kitchen counter and the breakfast table. Diane had hidden a camera inside the one object in that kitchen no one would ever move, no one would ever question, no one would ever think to examine. The tree she had nurtured with such visible devotion that its presence had become invisible. The timestamp in the corner read March 28th, 7:04 a.m. Sunlight angled through the window in the particular way it does in late March in Chicago, low and sharp, slicing across the counter in a band of pale gold. The kitchen was empty. The blender sat beside the refrigerator, a glass pitcher filled with the deep green liquid Diane prepared every evening. Kale, celery, cucumber, ginger, a splash of apple juice for sweetness. She drank it every morning without fail. She called it her green insurance policy. For 12 seconds, nothing happened. The kitchen sat still and ordinary. I could hear the refrigerator humming through the audio. And somewhere beyond the window, a car door closing, the sounds of our house. The sounds of a Tuesday morning. Then Ryan walked into the frame, my eldest son, 44 years old, 6'1". Wearing the tan Carhartt jacket he always wore to job sites, steel-toed boots, his company lanyard still around his neck. He moved with a calm that made my stomach turn, not rushing, not looking over his shoulder, not exhibiting a single sign of hesitation. He opened the refrigerator and removed the glass pitcher of juice. He set it on the counter. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled a small plastic bottle with no label. The liquid inside was clear, colorless, indistinguishable from water. He unscrewed the cap of the juice pitcher, tilted the plastic bottle, and poured. The stream was thin, controlled. He poured for approximately 3 seconds. Then he recapped the bottle, returned it to his jacket pocket, picked up the pitcher, and swirled it gently twice, the way you might swirl a glass of wine. He placed the pitcher back in the refrigerator, closed the door, and checked the counter. No drops. No residue. No evidence. 25 seconds. The entire act had taken 25 seconds. Ryan glanced toward the hallway that led to the stairs that led to the bedroom where I was still sleeping. Then he turned and walked out of the frame. A moment later, the faint sound of the front door opening and closing came through the audio. Then the kitchen was empty again. Just the counter, the blender, the bonsai tree watching from the windowsill. I could not move. I could not speak. My lungs had forgotten their function. Frank sat beside me, and I felt his hand come to rest on my shoulder. Firm, anchoring. The hand of a man who understood that what I had just witnessed had rewritten every truth I carried. That was my son who had learned to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk outside our house while I jogged beside him with my hand on the seat. My son who had cried for an hour when his goldfish died and insisted we hold a proper funeral in the backyard. My son who had stood in the kitchen, that very same kitchen, and carved his first Thanksgiving turkey at 19, looking at me with such pride I thought my heart would come apart. That man had walked into his mother's kitchen at 7:04 in the morning, poured poison into her juice, and walked out as if he were picking up coffee on his way to work. Frank paused the video. The image froze on the empty kitchen, the light still falling in its pale band across the counter, the bonsai still watching. "Martin," he said gently. His voice seemed to come from very far away. I tried to respond. My mouth opened, but no sound arrived. I was aware of my body, the chair beneath me, the counter edge pressing against my forearms, but all of it felt remote, as if I were observing myself from across the room. The juice. Diane's green insurance policy. The one she drank every morning. The one she had prepared faithfully for years, believing it was keeping her healthy. Ryan had turned it into something else entirely. He had turned her discipline, her care, her belief in her own health, into the vehicle that would destroy her. Frank spoke again. Carefully. "There are 5 more videos. Martin, 5 more." The number hung in the air like something physical. He scrolled down the file directory. The second video was labeled Kitchen, March 28th, 9:15 p.m. The same day, less than 14 hours after what I had just watched. "I need to show you this one," Frank said. His voice was lower now, weighted with reluctance. "Because the person who enters the kitchen in this video is not Ryan." My blood went cold. Not Ryan. There were only 3 people with keys to our house. Diane, Ryan, and Jason. Frank's hand hovered over the mouse. He looked at me the way a man looks at a friend before delivering the kind of news that cannot be taken back. I nodded. He clicked play. The second video began, and for one desperate moment, I bargained with the screen. I told myself it could be anyone. A neighbor, checking on the house. A maintenance worker. A friend, Diane, had given a spare key. The mind, when it senses annihilation approaching, will construct any lie to delay the impact. But the figure who stepped into my kitchen at 9:15 that evening was not a stranger. He was shorter than Ryan, narrower in the shoulders, wearing the pale blue Oxford shirt he always wore to the office. His movements were different from his brother's. Where Ryan had been smooth and unhurried, Jason was cautious. He paused inside the doorway and looked around the kitchen the way a man surveys a room before committing something he knows is wrong. My younger son, 38 years old. The boy who had once hand-drawn a birthday card for Diane every single year, from age 5 to 18. The boy who had studied quietly at the breakfast table while Ryan played basketball in the driveway. The boy I always thought of as the gentle one. Jason walked to the desk in the corner where we kept the household laptop. The one Diane and I shared for emails, bills, and the security camera system we had installed the year before after a string of break-ins on our block. He sat down, opened the laptop, and navigated with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. I could see the security camera interface on the screen. The grid of 4 camera views covering the front porch, the back door, the garage, and the kitchen. He selected all recordings from the past 7 days. Then he deleted them. Not one camera. All 4. 7 days of footage. Erased in a matter of seconds. He clicked through a confirmation dialog, checked the trash folder, emptied it, then closed the browser, and wiped the keyboard with a dish towel. The same dish towel Diane had embroidered with small sunflowers during a craft phase 3 winters ago. My son used his mother's embroidered towel to wipe away the evidence of her murder. He closed the laptop, stood, pushed the chair back into position, and left the kitchen. The video continued for another 30 seconds, capturing nothing but the empty room and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Then it ended. I sat in Frank's workshop, staring at the blank screen, and understood something that fundamentally altered the architecture of my grief. This was not the act of one son. This was coordinated, planned, divided into roles. Ryan administered the poison. Jason erased the surveillance. They had turned their mother's murder into a project, splitting tasks the way they might have divided chores as children. Frank did not speak. He did not need to. The silence between us carried its own language. After what felt like an hour but was probably 2 minutes, Frank moved the cursor to the first audio file. It was labeled Phone Call, March 28th, 10:45 p.m., barely an hour and a half after Jason had finished at the laptop. This was recorded through the kitchen window, Frank said. Diane told me she would leave the window cracked open at night, whenever she expected them to be nearby. The bonsai microphone picked up anything within about 20 feet. He pressed play. Static first. Then the sound of the back porch, crickets, a distant siren somewhere on Fullerton Avenue, the creak of the wooden railing that I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. Someone was sitting outside. The rustle of fabric suggested movement, shifting weight. Then Ryan's voice. Clear. Controlled. Familiar. In a way that now made my skin crawl. Did you clear the cameras? Jason's voice answered. Slightly distant, as if he were standing a few feet away, possibly leaning against the house. Done. I wiped everything from the last 7 days. History, cache, trash folder. Even the automatic cloud backup. It is all gone. Good. Ryan said it. The way you might acknowledge a completed line item on a checklist. No emotion. No gravity. Just progress. The juice blend masks the taste completely. She had her glass this morning right on schedule. She will not notice anything until it is too late. A pause. I could hear Jason breathing. When he spoke, his voice was thinner, higher. The voice of a man trying very hard to sound certain. How long? 4 to 6 weeks, Ryan answered. Gradual kidney failure. The emergency room will call it chronic renal disease. Happens all the time in women her age. No one autopsies a 66-year-old woman with kidney failure, especially one whose medical records already show borderline creatinine levels. I felt my stomach lurch. Borderline creatinine levels. Diane had mentioned at a doctor's visit in January that one of her numbers was slightly elevated. The doctor had told her to drink more water and come back in 3 months. Ryan had known. He had used his mother's medical history to calibrate the murder. Jason spoke again. And Dad? What about Dad? After. What happens after? Ryan's tone shifted. Slightly impatient, as if explaining something obvious to someone who should already understand. Dad falls apart. He is 66. Just lost his wife. No purpose outside of retirement. He will not look at the finances for months. Maybe a year. I handle the trust paperwork. You handle the accounts. We move the numbers slowly. By the time anyone notices, the debt is clear, and we are in the open. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear Jason swallow. And if he does notice? Ryan did not hesitate. Then we deal with it. The same way we are dealing with this. One step at a time. The recording ended. The back porch sounds faded to silence. Frank stopped the playback. The laptop screen returned to the file directory, the cursor blinking patiently, indifferently, as if what we had just heard were no more significant than an email notification. I stared at the screen. My hands were shaking so violently that I pressed them flat against the workbench to keep them from rattling against the wood. Something had broken inside me. Not cracked. Not fractured. Broken. The way a bridge breaks when the load it was built to carry is exceeded without warning. I was a structural engineer for 34 years. I understood failure tolerances. I understood that every material, every beam, every foundation has a point beyond which it simply cannot hold. I had reached mine. Frank placed both hands on the desk and leaned forward. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. Martin, there is more. There is a recording from the night before she collapsed. April 14th. And there is her letter. 15 pages. He pointed to the bottom of the file directory. The document file sat there. Its name, in plain text. Unhurried. Devastating. For Martin. If you are reading this. I failed. I read those 8 words 3 times. Each time they arrived differently. The first time as confusion. The second time as grief. The third time as a door opening onto a corridor I could never walk back through. Diane had known. She had known everything. She had recorded it, preserved it, hidden it inside the ring she wore every day. And she had prepared for the possibility that she would not survive long enough to show me herself. She had failed, she said. But sitting in Frank's workshop with her evidence glowing on a laptop screen between us, I understood something she had not been able to see. She had not failed at all. Frank did not open the letter. Not yet. Instead, he moved the cursor to the second audio file. His hand hesitated above the mouse, and when he looked at me, there was something new in his expression. Not just sadness. Warning. This one is from the night before she collapsed, he said. April 14th. It was recorded the same way, through the kitchen window. But the voices on this recording are different. One of them is Ryan. The other is someone I do not recognize. He pressed play. The sound of the back porch arrived first. The creak of the wooden swing. The one Diane and I had sat on every summer evening for 20 years. I had proposed repairs a dozen times, but she always stopped me. She said the creak was part of its character. The same way she defended the chipped blue mug in the kitchen or the fraying quilt on our bed. Diane believed the things that wore down with use were the things that mattered most. Someone was sitting on that swing now. I could hear the rhythmic groan of the chains, a slow back and forth, like a metronome counting down to something I was not yet prepared to hear. Ryan's voice came first. Low, tight, controlled. I told you I need more time. The second voice was unfamiliar. Deeper. Accented. The vowels slightly flattened in a way that suggested Eastern European origin. The tone carried no warmth, no negotiation. It was the voice of a man who had long since stopped pretending to be reasonable. Time is not something you purchase from us, the man said. You borrow it, and your balance is overdue. 800,000. The deadline was January. You moved it to March. March has passed. My employers do not operate on goodwill. Ryan responded quickly. I am handling it. The trust pays out once my mother is gone. My father will not contest anything. He will be too broken to function. Jason manages the accounts. We can have the full amount wired within 60 days of her death. The man on the swing stopped rocking. The chains went silent. And if your father does not cooperate? If he asks questions? If he notices the accounts have been emptied? Ryan did not hesitate. Then my father has an accident too. Jason is already working on making it look like a fall. Basement stairs, bad lighting, a 66-year-old man grieving his wife, not sleeping, unsteady on his feet. Nobody questions a fall. The words entered me like shrapnel. Each one found a different organ. My son had discussed my death on the porch swing, where Diane used to rest her head on my shoulder and watch the fireflies. The man spoke again. We do not accept promises from men who have already failed one deadline. You have until December 31st. If the money is not in the account by then, we begin with your kneecaps. Then we work outward. Your wife, your daughter, your old man. Nobody is exempt. Nobody disappears from us. Ryan's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. You will have it. I swear to you. Everything is already in motion. A chair scraped. Footsteps on the porch boards. The back gate opened and closed. Then Ryan was alone. I could hear him breathing. Fast and shallow. The way a man breathes when the walls are closing in and there is no exit that does not cost someone else their life. The audio ended. Frank stopped the playback and sat back. The man's name did not appear in the recording. I did not know yet that his name was Niko Petrov, that he was 35 years old, that he represented an organization that had loaned my son $800,000 to cover gambling losses on sporting events, and that this organization did not consider violence a last resort. It considered violence a scheduling matter. But I would learn all of that soon enough. What I understood in that moment was simpler and more devastating. Ryan was not merely greedy. He was trapped. He owed money to people who would kill him, and everyone connected to him if he did not pay. And the only currency he could offer them was us. Diane first, then me. Our lives, converted into trust distributions and insurance payouts, laundered through grief and paperwork. Frank pointed to the screen. There is one more thing before the letter. A video. April 14th, 11:08 p.m. About an hour before she recorded the message on the voice file. I think this is when she confirmed it for herself. He clicked the file. The kitchen appeared again on screen, but this time the light was different. A single lamp above the stove, casting the room in warm amber. The rest of the house was dark. The timestamp read 11:08 p.m. Diane moved into the frame slowly. She wore the gray cardigan I had given her for her 65th birthday. The one she said was too soft to ever take off. Her hair was pulled back loosely. Even through the limited resolution of the hidden camera, I could see that she looked thin, thinner than I had noticed at the time. The skin beneath her eyes was shadowed, and her movements carried a deliberateness that spoke of someone conserving energy she no longer had. She opened the refrigerator and removed the pitcher of juice. She poured a small amount into a glass. Then, from a drawer near the stove, the drawer where she kept takeout menus and spare batteries and the odds and ends of daily life, she pulled out a small plastic case. I recognized it instantly. Her rapid screening kit. Diane had kept it from her years as a registered nurse. The kit contained test strips for common toxic substances, the kind used in emergency departments for preliminary identification. She had never thrown it away. She said a good nurse never forgets her training. She dipped a test strip into the juice. Then she set the glass on the counter, folded her arms across her chest, and waited. 30 seconds. 45. I watched her face through the camera. She was not anxious. She was not panicking. She already knew what the result would be. She was confirming. The strip changed color. Even through the screen, I could see it shift from pale yellow to a deep, unmistakable blue. Diane stared at the strip for a long time. Then she sat down at the breakfast table, the table where we had shared 40 years of morning coffee, and placed both hands flat on the surface. Her shoulders rose and fell with one long, controlled breath. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply sat there, absorbing the confirmation that her own sons were poisoning her. Then she looked up, directly at the bonsai tree, directly into the camera, directly at me. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her face said everything. The grief, the betrayal, the apology for what she was about to put me through. And beneath all of it, something I did not expect. Resolve. A quiet, ferocious determination that told me she was not going to let them win. She held my gaze through the lens for what felt like eternity. Then she stood, poured the juice down the sink, rinsed the glass, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. She disposed of the test strip. She returned the kit to the drawer, and she walked out of the frame, into the hallway, toward the desk where I imagined she would sit down and begin writing a 15-page letter to the man she had loved for 4 decades. The video ended. The screen went dark. Frank's hand rested on the edge of the laptop. He did not move it. The workshop was silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the storefront, and the sound of my own breathing, ragged and shallow. He pointed to the next file. Video 4, he said quietly. April 15th. 5:47 a.m. This is the morning she collapsed. But Martin, something happens in this video that neither of us expected. Something she could not have planned for. He looked at me. Do you want to continue? I could not feel my hands. I could not feel the chair beneath me. But I heard Diane's voice in my memory, from 1,000 ordinary mornings, the simple call she made every day when breakfast was ready. Martin, come down. Coffee is getting cold. Play it, I said. The kitchen appeared on screen for the 4th time. But now everything about it felt different. The light was gray and uncertain. The kind that comes through Chicago windows in mid-April, before the sun has fully committed to rising. The counter was clean. The stove was dark. The bonsai sat on the windowsill, its camera eye recording what would become the last morning of my wife's life. Outside, beyond the glass, I could hear birds. The early ones. The ones Diane used to pause and listen to while she waited for the coffee to brew. She called them God's alarm clock. She said the fact that they sang before dawn, before anyone was awake to hear them, proved that beauty did not require an audience. Diane entered the frame at 5:43 a.m. She was moving slowly, one hand trailing along the counter edge, as if steadying herself. She wore the gray cardigan again, the one from the night before, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked like she had not slept. I do not think she had. 4 hours earlier, she had been sitting at her desk, writing me a 15-page letter. Before that, she had tested the juice and watched the strip turn blue. She had spent the entire night carrying the confirmed knowledge that her own children were killing her, and she had still gotten up at dawn to follow her morning routine. Because that is who Diane was. Routine was her armor. She believed that if you maintained the ordinary things, the coffee, the juice, the morning birds, the small ceremonies of a life in progress, then the extraordinary things could not entirely consume you. She opened the refrigerator and removed the pitcher. She must have prepared a fresh batch the night before, after pouring the contaminated one down the sink. Or perhaps she had not. Perhaps she understood that this batch was poisoned too, that Ryan would have returned to dose it again, and she drank it anyway, because refusing would have alerted them that she knew. I will never know which it was. The thought of either possibility is unbearable. She poured a full glass. She carried it to the breakfast table, sat down in her usual chair, the one closest to the window, and drank it slowly. I watched her throat move with each swallow. I watched her set the glass down and wrap both hands around it, the way she always held warm things, even when they were cold. I watched her look out the window toward the garden she would never tend again. At 5:47 a.m., she stood, or tried to. Her hands pressed flat against the table for leverage, but her arms buckled. She swayed sideways, caught the edge of the chair, missed, and her knees gave way beneath her. She reached for the counter, but found only air. She fell. The sound was terrible. Not loud, but wrong. The dull, heavy impact of a human body meeting a tile floor without any attempt to break the fall. Her head struck the edge of the table leg on the way down, a sharp crack that came through the audio with sickening clarity. Then she was on the floor, face down, one arm bent beneath her, the other stretched outward toward the base of the stove, as if reaching for something only she could see. I could hear her breathing through the microphone. Shallow, irregular, wet, the sounds of lungs that were beginning to fail. I wanted to reach through the screen. I wanted to kneel beside her, lift her head, call her name, press my mouth to hers and breathe for her the way they taught us in the CPR class we took together 20 years ago at the community center on Fullerton. I wanted to be there. I was not there. I was upstairs sleeping, while my wife died, on our kitchen floor. For 47 seconds, the kitchen was still. Just Diane on the tile, her breathing growing weaker, and the first thin rays of morning light beginning to stretch across the counter above her. Then Jason appeared. He came from the hallway. Not from the front door. Not from outside. From inside the house. He had been there, waiting, in the dark, in our home. While his mother drank the poison his brother had planted, my younger son had been standing somewhere in the shadows of the house we had raised him in, listening for the sound of her body hitting the floor. He stepped into the kitchen and looked down at her. His face showed nothing. Not panic, not guilt, not horror. Nothing. He looked at his mother, the way a man looks at a task that has reached its expected conclusion. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He did not dial 911. He called Ryan. "It is happening. She is down." I could not hear Ryan's response. Only Jason's side. He listened for a moment, then said, "How long do I wait?" Another pause. Jason nodded slightly, as if receiving instructions. "Okay. 10 minutes. Then I call." He ended the call. Then he sat down. Not beside her. Not on the floor next to his mother's failing body. He sat in the chair at the breakfast table. The chair directly across from where Diane usually sat. The chair where I sat every morning for decades. And he placed his phone on the table in front of him. And he waited. I counted with him. I could not help it. The timestamp ticked forward in the corner of the screen. Each second visible. Each second an act of deliberate inaction. 1 minute. Diane's breathing grew shallower. 3 minutes. Her hand, the one reaching toward the stove, curled slightly inward. 5 minutes. Jason checked his watch. First time. 7 minutes. The breathing was barely audible now. A faint, wet whisper. Through the microphone. 8 minutes. Jason checked his watch again. He adjusted his shirt collar. 9 minutes. Silence from the floor. I could no longer hear her breathing. 10 minutes. Jason checked his watch a third time. Then, he picked up his phone and dialed. The transformation was instantaneous. His voice, which had been flat and measured 30 seconds earlier, exploded into panic. High. Desperate. Cracking. 911. My mother. She collapsed. I do not know what happened. I came downstairs and she was on the floor. Please. Please, you have to send someone. I think she is not breathing. Please hurry. The performance was flawless. Every stammer, every hitch in his breath, every trembling repetition of please was calibrated to project the terror of a son discovering his mother unconscious on the kitchen floor. If I had not watched the previous 10 minutes, I would have believed him completely. Anyone would have. The call ended. Jason remained seated at the table. He put his head in his hands and practiced the posture of grief, shoulders hunched, body folded forward, the image of devastation. Rehearsing, preparing for the paramedics who would arrive in 6 minutes and find a loving son kneeling beside his fallen mother. The video ended. The screen went black. Frank closed the laptop slowly. The click of the lid meeting the base sounded final, like a door closing on a room I would never be able to re-enter. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The workshop held its silence the way old rooms do. Patiently, without judgment. Then Frank said, very quietly, "There is one more thing, Martin. The letter." 15 pages. She wrote it the night before this happened. And there is a final video. I. Come on. A message she recorded just for you. He opened the laptop again and navigated to the document file. For Martin. If you are reading this. I failed. I had read those words before, on the file directory. But now, after watching my wife fall and my son sit and wait and then perform his grief for an audience of dispatchers, the words carried a different weight. They were not a title. They were a confession, an apology. A hand extended across the divide between the living and the dead. Read it here, I said. If I leave this room, I might never come back. Diane's handwriting had always been the neatest thing about her. Every letter slanted gently to the right. Every word spaced with the precision of someone who believed that how you wrote something mattered as much as what you said. I had seen that handwriting on grocery lists, on birthday cards tucked into my briefcase, on the margins of recipe binders. A pinch more basil. Martin likes it thicker. Now I was seeing it on a letter she had written knowing she might not survive the night. The first line read, "My dearest Martin, if you are reading this, then I lost the race against our sons." Frank sat beside me in silence, giving me the space a man needs when his world is being rewritten one sentence at a time. I plan to tell you everything on our anniversary. November 3rd. The letter continued. I was going to take you to that little Italian place on Taylor Street, the one near Rose's Bakery where we had our first date. After dinner, I would have shown you the videos, the test results, everything. I thought I had time. I was wrong. Diane explained how she first noticed the symptoms. February. Fatigue beyond ordinary tiredness. Nausea without pattern. Her hair thinning at the temples. A metallic taste she initially blamed on multivitamins. But Diane was a nurse. 31 years in emergency medicine had given her instincts that did not retire when she did. The fatigue was too deep. The nausea too specific. And the metallic taste matched a toxicological profile she had studied during a continuing education seminar on environmental poisoning. Ethylene glycol. She wrote the name in capital letters, underlined twice. I knew what it was the moment I tasted it in my own juice. Ethylene glycol is sweet. Mixed into vegetable juice with ginger and apple, it becomes nearly undetectable. She sent a sample to a private laboratory in Evanston. A friend from nursing ran the facility. Results came within 48 hours. Ethylene glycol. Concentration consistent with repeated low-dose exposure over several weeks. My heart did not break because of the poison, Martin. It broke because I knew who had the key to our house. She described the days that followed. Watching Ryan arrive on schedule, always finding a reason to be in the kitchen. Noticing Jason's visits coincided with gaps in the security footage. Tracking late-night phone calls to numbers she did not recognize. She contacted her friend at Northwestern and commissioned the synthetic diamond with the embedded micro SD card. She purchased a miniature camera and concealed it inside the bonsai tree. She began recording on March 28th. I captured everything. Ryan pouring the liquid. Jason deleting footage. Their conversations on the porch. I gathered every piece, because I knew no one would believe a mother accusing her own sons without proof. On April 12th, 3 days before she collapsed, Diane signed a new will with Angela Ferris, an attorney in the loop whom she had found through the Illinois Bar Association's elder law directory. She chose Angela specifically because the woman had no connection to our family. The terms were precise. 90% of our combined estate, approximately $2.8 million, would transfer to the Chicago Community Care Foundation, a nonprofit serving elderly victims of financial abuse. Ryan would receive $50,000. Jason would receive $50,000. I did not cut them out entirely. Part of me still hopes they will use this money to find help for whatever broke inside them. But I will not allow them to profit from my death. I will not allow the life you and I built together to be converted into payment for gambling debts and criminal obligations. She left the original will untouched in our filing cabinet, knowing its removal would alert the boys. The new will was secured in Angela's office, safe with a certified copy stored separately. The middle pages cataloged financial evidence. Trust withdrawals. Transfers to Ryan's accounts. Spending patterns suggesting Jason was embezzling from his employer. Her estimates, I would later learn, were remarkably close to the actual figures. The final pages were different. The ink less even. The letters fractionally larger, as if her hand had begun to tremble and she was writing through it by force of will. I fell in love with you at Rosa's Bakery on Taylor Street in 1983. You were 25, wearing a coat too big for you, carrying a bag of flour for your mother's birthday cake. You tripped coming through the door and the bag split open. Flour everywhere. On your coat, on the floor, on the display case. And instead of cursing, you laughed. You stood there covered in white powder, laughing at yourself like a man who understood that the world was fundamentally absurd, and the only sane response was joy. I knew in that moment. Before you turned and saw me, before you apologized to Rosa 5 times, before you offered to sweep up and knocked over the broom, I have loved you since that exact second, Martin Cole, and I have not stopped for one day in 40 years. My vision blurred. I pressed my thumb against the bridge of my nose until the words came back into focus. I carried this alone because I could not bear to watch you learn that the boys we raised together chose money over their mother's life. I wanted to protect you from that devastation. I wanted you to sleep peacefully for a few more nights without having to cry over our sons. I should have told you the moment I knew. Forgive my silence, my love. It was never about doubt. It was about mercy. Her final instructions were clear. Go to Frank. Get the micro SD card. Contact a criminal attorney. Call the police. And above all, do not confront Ryan and Jason alone. Promise me, Martin. The last line read, all my love, always and forever. Diane. April 14th, 2024, 11:30 p.m., 3 hours before she fell on our kitchen floor. I set the pages down. The paper was damp where my tears had fallen. Frank waited. He understood that some silences are not empty, but overfull, and breaking them too soon would shatter whatever fragile structure the person inside them has built. When I looked up, he pointed to the screen. One final video file. April 14th, 11:58 p.m. The file name was simple. For Martin, she recorded this after the letter. Frank said quietly. She sat at the kitchen table, looked into the bonsai, and spoke directly to you. This one is not evidence, Martin. This one is personal. I nodded. My throat was too tight for words. Frank pressed play. The final file on the micro SD was not labeled like the others. There was no date in the title, no room name, no timestamp format. It simply read, For Martin. Frank hesitated before clicking it. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to pull them back or let them jump. I nodded. He pressed play. The screen filled with Diane's face. She was sitting in our bedroom, in the chair by the window where she used to read before her eyes got too tired. The lamp behind her cast a soft amber glow across her shoulders. She was wearing the gray cardigan again, the same one from the kitchen videos, and her hair was pulled back loosely, the way she wore it when she was not expecting visitors. Her skin looked thin. Her cheekbones were sharper than I remembered, but her eyes were the same. Dark brown, steady, full of something I had spent 40 years trying to understand and never quite could. The timestamp in the corner read the 14th of April, 2024, 11:58 p.m. 15 hours before she collapsed on our kitchen floor. She did not speak for the first several seconds. She just looked into the camera, her lips pressed together, her chin trembling once before she steadied it. Then she took a breath, and her voice came through the laptop speakers like a hand reaching out of the past to touch my face. Martin, if you are watching this, then Frank kept his promise. And I am gone. She paused. Her fingers moved to the collar of her cardigan and pulled it tighter around her neck. I could see the veins in her hands, the way they had become more visible in her last weeks, though I had told myself it was just age. I recorded everything I could. I hid what I found. I wrote you the letter because I needed you to understand the facts. But this video is not about facts. This one is just for you. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked away from the camera for a moment, toward the window. I knew that window. I knew what she could see from it. The backyard, the oak tree, the garden she had planted the year Ryan was born. I want you to know that I am not angry. I was, for a while. When I first realized what they were doing, I felt a kind of rage I did not know I was capable of. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them. I wanted to ask them how they could do this to the woman who carried them, who fed them, who sat by their beds when they were sick and afraid. But the rage passed. What replaced it was something quieter and much worse. It was grief. Not for myself. For you. Because I know what this will do to you, Martin. And I am sorry. I am so sorry that I could not stop it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Not dramatically. Not the way people cry in movies. It was small and private, the way Diane always handled pain. As though showing it fully would be an imposition on the people around her. I thought about not telling you. I thought about just letting it happen. And letting you believe what the doctors would say. Kidney failure. Natural causes. A quiet death for a quiet woman. And part of me wanted that. Part of me wanted to protect you from the truth. Because the truth is a terrible thing, Martin. The truth is that the boys we raised, the boys we loved, the boys whose names I whispered into the dark when they were infants, those boys decided that my life was worth less than their debts. She stopped. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the lamp and the distant noise of a car passing on Maple Street. But I could not do that to you. I could not let you live the rest of your life trusting the people who killed me. I could not let you sit across from them at Thanksgiving and not know. That would be its own kind of poison, Martin. A slower one, and you deserve better than that. She leaned forward slightly, and her face filled more of the screen. I could see the fine lines around her mouth, the small scar on her left eyebrow from the time she fell off a ladder painting the nursery ceiling in 1982. I could see the woman I married. So here is what I need you to do. Not for me, for yourself. I need you to be angry. I need you to take everything I left you, the videos, the recordings, the letter, the will, and I need you to fight. Not with your fists. You were never that kind of man. And I loved you for it. Fight with the truth. Find a lawyer. Find a detective. Let the system do what it was built to do. And when it is over, when they are held accountable, I need you to do one more thing. She smiled then. It was small and sad, and so familiar that I felt something break inside my chest that I did not know was still intact. I need you to live. Plant something. Read a book. Sit in the garden and listen to the birds the way you used to before life got so loud. Do not let this destroy you. Do not let their choices become your prison. You are 66 years old, Martin Cole, and you still have time. Use it. She reached toward the camera, and for a moment her hand filled the frame, her fingers slightly blurred, as though she were trying to touch the person on the other side of the screen. Then she pulled back. I love you. I have loved you since the afternoon you walked into Rosa's bakery with plaster dust on your shirt and asked me if the cinnamon rolls were any good. I loved you when we had nothing. I loved you when we built everything. I loved you when the boys were small and the house was loud and the future seemed infinite. And I love you now, in this room, in this chair, knowing what tomorrow will bring. Her hand moved to the lamp. The screen went dark. But before the recording ended, I heard her voice one final time, barely above a whisper. Goodbye, Martin. The laptop screen returned to the file directory. 6 videos. 3 audio files. 1 document. And this, the 7th file. The one that was never meant for a courtroom. Frank did not speak. He sat with his hands folded on the workbench, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the wall. The shop was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock near the front window, the one Diane had always admired when she visited. I do not know how long I sat there. It could have been 5 minutes or 30. Time had become unreliable, the way it does when the world you understood is replaced by one you do not recognize. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone older, someone who had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Frank, he looked at me. I need a criminal attorney. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now. Frank reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a business card. It was slightly bent at one corner, as though it had been carried for a long time. He placed it on the workbench between us. The name on the card read, Patricia Okafor, Criminal Defense and Prosecution Consulting, Illinois State Bar. Diane gave me this, Frank said quietly. The last time she came in, she said you would ask. I picked up the card. It was warm from his pocket. I held it the way I had held Diane's ring for 8 months, like it was the last solid thing in a world that had turned to smoke. I stood up, put on my coat, and walked toward the door. Behind me, Frank said. Martin. I stopped. She was the bravest person I ever knew. I did not turn around. I could not. Because if I looked back, I would sit down again. And if I sat down again, I might never stand up. I opened the door and stepped into the Chicago cold. Patricia Okafor's office was on the 14th floor of a building on South LaSalle Street, the kind of building where the elevators smelled like old leather, and the hallways were lit, just bright enough to make you feel like every conversation happening behind closed doors was about something serious. I arrived at 9 in the morning, 2 days after I had walked out of Frank's shop. I had not slept in those 2 days. But I had called the number on the card, and the woman who answered had said 4 words that kept me upright. Come in. I am ready. The receptionist led me to a corner office with tall windows overlooking the Chicago River. Patricia Okafor stood when I entered. She was in her early 50s. Tall, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She wore a dark navy suit. No jewelry except for a thin gold chain at her neck. Her handshake was firm and brief. She did not smile. She pulled out a chair for me, sat across the desk and said, "Tell me everything. Start with the ring." I talked for nearly 2 hours. I told her about Frank's discovery, the synthetic stone, the micro SD card. I described each video, each audio file, each page of Diane's letter. I told her about Ryan pouring the liquid into the juice pitcher, about Jason erasing the security cameras, about their phone call, their voices calm and businesslike, discussing my wife's death the way 2 contractors might discuss a demolition schedule, about Niko Petrov demanding money from Ryan, about Diane testing her own juice and finding ethylene glycol, about the morning of April 15th, when Diane collapsed and Jason waited 10 minutes before calling for help. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she removed her glasses, placed them on the desk, and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. It was not pity. It was the look of someone who had heard terrible things before and had learned to hold them at a distance just long enough to think clearly. "Martin," she said, "your wife built a case. A real one. The micro SD alone gives us video evidence of tampering, audio evidence of conspiracy, and a written statement identifying the poison and the perpetrators. Combined with toxicology from exhumation, this is prosecutable. But your sons will hire attorneys. They will challenge the recordings. They will argue chain of custody was compromised because the evidence passed through a jeweler, not law enforcement. And they will try to break you on the stand." She paused and let the weight of that settle. "I want to bring in a detective. Mike Brennan. Homicide. Area 3. 22 years on the force. He is thorough. He does not leak to the press. And I trust him." Brennan arrived 40 minutes later. He was a compact man in his late 40s, with a squared jaw and thinning red hair. He wore a gray sport coat over a white shirt with no tie. He carried a leather notebook that looked like it had survived a decade of rain and coffee spills. He sat in the chair next to mine and said, "Patricia briefed me on the phone. Tell me about your sons." I told him about Ryan, 44, construction manager. Gambling debts Diane had discovered through bank statements in his coat pocket during a Thanksgiving visit. Then, Jason, 38, senior accountant. Diane had found discrepancies in the family trust, small amounts at first, then larger ones, totaling over $800,000 over 3 years. Brennan wrote as I spoke. His questions were sharp. Did either son have a key to your house? Yes. Did Diane change the locks before her death? No. Did either son visit between March 28th and April 15th? Ryan on April 2nd, Jason on April 8th, and again on April 14th. Did you notice anything unusual? No. I noticed nothing. Brennan closed his notebook and looked at Patricia. Something passed between them, a silent exchange that meant they had worked together before. Here is what I recommend, Brennan said. First, we authenticate the micro SD through our forensic lab. Chain of custody starts now. Second, we file for exhumation. If your wife was poisoned with ethylene glycol, calcium oxalate crystals will still be present in kidney tissue. Third, we run a full financial audit on both sons. Patricia can subpoena records through a grand jury. Fourth, we identify Niko Petrov. If he is connected to organized debt collection, that opens a RICO angle. Fifth, we place you under protective surveillance starting tonight. He leaned forward. Sixth, this is the hardest one. You cannot contact your sons in any way that suggests you know. If Ryan calls, you answer like a grieving father. If Jason stops by, you talk about the weather. You act normal until we move. Can you do that? I looked at the card on Patricia's desk. Diane had chosen this lawyer. She had anticipated this moment. She had planned for everything, except surviving long enough to see it through. I can do that, I said. Brennan nodded. Good. Because the moment they realize, this stops being an investigation and starts being a race. Patricia opened a drawer and pulled out 3 documents. A formal retainer agreement. A consent form for exhumation. A temporary witness protection request for my residential address. Sign these, she said. And then we begin. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. For the first time, in 2 days, it was steady. I signed all 3. Outside the window, the Chicago River moved slowly beneath the LaSalle Street Bridge. Gray and patient. Diane had always loved that river. She said it reminded her that even dirty water eventually finds its way to something bigger. I put the pen down and said, "What happens first?" Brennan stood, buttoned his coat and said, "First, I visit Frank Bellini. Then I visit the Cook County medical examiner. And then, Mr. Cole, we open your wife's grave." The room went quiet. Patricia closed the folder, and I sat in that leather chair on the 14th floor, watching the river through the glass, thinking about the woman who had loved me enough to die with a plan. 3 days after I signed the papers in Patricia's office, Detective Brennan called me at 6 in the morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had not touched, staring at the bonsai tree on the windowsill. The same tree that had hidden Diane's camera. I had not moved it. I could not bring myself to touch it, knowing what it had witnessed. "Martin," Brennan said, "I need you to come to Patricia's office at noon. We found something in the financial records, and I need you to stay calm when I tell you what it is." I arrived at 11:45. Patricia was standing by the window with her arms crossed, and Brennan was seated at the conference table with a stack of documents spread out in front of him. There was a third person in the room. A woman I had not met before. She was young, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses that made her look older than she was. Martin, this is Sandra Wen, Patricia said. She is a forensic accountant. I brought her in to trace the financial trail your wife described in her letter. Sandra shook my hand and gestured to the documents on the table. Mr. Cole, I have been reviewing your family trust records, your son's personal banking activity, and several insurance filings associated with your wife's death. What I found is not good. She opened a folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a photocopy of a life insurance policy. The policyholder was listed as Diane Margaret Cole. The beneficiaries were Ryan Thomas Cole and Jason Michael Cole, split evenly. The death benefit was $2 million. I stared at it. I have never seen this policy before. That is because your wife never signed it, Sandra said. She placed a second sheet next to the first. It was Diane's actual signature, pulled from the trust documents on file with the family attorney. The two signatures were close but not identical. The loop on the D was different. The slant of the C was wrong. The pressure marks on the photocopy were too even, as though someone had practiced the signature multiple times before committing it to paper. This policy was opened 14 months before your wife's death, Sandra continued. The premiums were paid from an account registered under Jason's name, but funded through transfers from the family trust. Monthly payments of $412, drawn automatically. Your wife would not have seen them because Jason handled the trust statements and filtered what he showed you both. Brennan leaned forward. There is more. The insurance company processed the claim 6 weeks after Diane's death. The payout was approved and split into 2 disbursements. $1.1 million to Ryan, $900,000 to Jason. The funds were deposited into separate accounts, both opened within a week of Diane's funeral. The room felt smaller. The air felt thinner. I looked at the photocopy of the forged signature and thought about Jason sitting at our dining table every quarter, spreading out the trust statements, explaining the numbers in his calm and patient voice while Diane brought him coffee and asked if he wanted to stay for dinner. They planned this, I said. It was not a question. Yes, Patricia said. And the insurance policy gives us a critical piece of the prosecution. It establishes premeditation and financial motive beyond the trust embezzlement. This is not 2 sons who acted impulsively. This is a coordinated scheme that began more than a year before your wife died. Sandra opened another folder. I also found a pattern of cash withdrawals from Ryan's account. 23 withdrawals over 10 months, each between $4,000 and $9,000, just below the $10,000 threshold that triggers federal reporting. That is called structuring, and it is a federal offense on its own. The withdrawals total approximately $158,000. Based on timing and amounts, I believe these payments went to Nico Petrov. Brennan stood and walked to the window. He was quiet for a moment, watching the street below. Then, he turned to me. Martin, there is one more thing. Yesterday evening, Jason stopped by your house. My surveillance team saw him. He did not knock on the front door. He went around to the side of the house, near the utility panel. He was there for approximately 4 minutes. Then he left. I felt something cold move through my chest. What was he doing? We do not know yet. But I sent a technician this morning to inspect the panel. He found that the gas line valve had been loosened. Not enough to cause an immediate leak, but enough that over several days, gas would accumulate in the basement. The room went silent. Patricia sat down slowly. Sandra removed her glasses and set them on the table. Brennan's face did not change, but his voice dropped half a register when he spoke again. Martin, I do not think it is safe for you to return to that house. Not tonight. Not until this is over. Patricia reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of typed paper. I have arranged a safe house on the north side. It is a 2-bedroom apartment registered under a trust name that cannot be traced to you. Brennan's team will escort you there this afternoon. You will have a security detail at all times. I looked at the documents spread across the table. The forged insurance policy. The structured withdrawals. The gas line report. Each one was a layer of something I had refused to believe was possible, stacked neatly on top of the last like bricks in a wall my sons had been building around me for years. "How long?" I asked. "Weeks," Brennan said. "Maybe longer. We are moving as fast as we can, but we need the exhumation results, and we need to flip one of the peripheral players. Petrov, or someone close to him." I nodded. I did not argue. Diane had told me not to confront them alone. She had told me to trust the system, and now the system was telling me to leave my home because my youngest son had tried to fill my basement with gas. Patricia handed me a folded note. Diane left this with the insurance documents in the trust file. Sandra found it tucked between 2 pages. I unfolded it. Diane's handwriting. 3 lines. "Martin, if they change the insurance, they are not finished. Leave the house. Trust Patricia. I am sorry I cannot be there to tell you this myself." I folded the note and placed it in my shirt pocket, next to my heart, where I had carried her ring for 8 months before bringing it to Frank. Brennan picked up his keys. "The car is downstairs. Pack 1 bag. We leave in 30 minutes. I stood. My legs felt heavy, but they held. I walked toward the door, then stopped, and looked back at Patricia. "When this is over," I said, "I want them to know she saw everything. I want them to know their mother watched them and still loved them enough to give me the choice instead of going to the police herself." Patricia held my gaze. "They will know, Martin. That is the part that will break them." I walked out of the office, rode the elevator to the lobby, and stepped into the December air. Somewhere across the city, my sons were living their lives as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and the ground beneath them was already beginning to crack. The safe house was a second-floor apartment on a quiet street in Lincoln Square. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and windows that looked out onto an alley where nothing interesting ever happened. Brennan's team had swept it before I arrived. There was a new lock on the door, a prepaid phone on the counter, and a folder of instructions taped to the refrigerator. No internet, no landline, no contact with anyone outside the case without Brennan's approval. I had been there 4 days when Patricia called on the prepaid phone and asked me to come to her office. Sandra Wen had finished the full financial audit. When I arrived, Sandra had turned the conference table into a map of my family's ruin. Printed bank statements covered every inch of the surface, organized into 3 columns. The first column was labeled Ryan. The second was labeled Jason. The third, in the center, was labeled Family Trust. "Let me walk you through it," Sandra said. She stood at the head of the table with a laser pointer, as though she were presenting quarterly earnings to a board of directors. But the numbers she was about to show me were not earnings. They were the cost of betrayal, measured in dollars and cents. She started with Jason. "Your younger son began accessing the family trust without authorization in March of 2021. The first withdrawal was $12,000, transferred to a personal savings account he opened at a different bank. Over the next 3 years, he made 67 unauthorized transfers. The amounts ranged from $8,000 to $31,000 per transaction. The total is $814,000. She clicked to a printed spreadsheet. Each line was a withdrawal with a date, amount, and destination account. Some of the transfers had been disguised as legitimate trust expenses, quarterly tax payments that were slightly inflated, maintenance fees for properties the trust no longer owned, advisory fees paid to a consulting firm that Sandra had confirmed did not exist. "The consulting firm is called Lakefront Advisory Group," Sandra said. "It was registered in Delaware 18 months before Diane's death. The registered agent is a mail forwarding service. The sole beneficiary of the account is Jason Michael Cole." I looked at the spreadsheet and thought about the quarterly meetings at our dining table. Jason arriving with his leather briefcase, spreading the statements out, explaining every number with patience and precision. Diane pouring him coffee. Me nodding along because I trusted my son with our finances the way I trusted the floor beneath my feet. Sandra moved to Ryan's column. Your older son's situation is different but connected. Ryan's construction company, Cole and Partners, has been operating at a loss for 22 months. His personal gambling activity, primarily online sports betting through 3 separate platforms, has generated debts totaling approximately $1.4 million over 5 years. He has been covering minimum payments through a combination of credit lines, personal loans, and the insurance payout he received after Diane's death. She placed a chart on the table showing Ryan's debt trajectory. It climbed steeply, beginning in late 2019, and never came down. The insurance money, his share of $1.1 million, had slowed the bleeding but not stopped it. By Sandra's estimate, Ryan would be insolvent within 6 months. And then there is Petrov, Sandra said. She pulled out a separate folder. Niko Petrov operates through a network of private lending contacts on the Northwest Side. He is not affiliated with any known organized crime family, but his methods are consistent with unlicensed loan sharking. Ryan borrowed approximately $200,000 from Petrov between January and September of 2023. The structured cash withdrawals we identified, $158,000, represent partial repayment. Ryan still owes Petrov roughly $42,000 plus interest. Brennan, who had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, spoke for the first time. Petrov is not patient. The audio recording from the microSD confirms he threatened Ryan directly. We believe that threat accelerated the timeline. Ryan needed money fast, and the fastest source was the insurance policy on Diane. The room was quiet for a moment. Sandra organized the papers back into their folders. Patricia made notes on her legal pad. Then Brennan's prepaid phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and something changed in his expression. Not alarm. Something closer to controlled surprise. He stepped into the hallway, spoke in a low voice for 2 minutes, then returned. That was my surveillance team, he said. Martin, your daughter-in-law just called the main precinct and asked to speak with a detective handling a case involving the Cole family. She would not give details over the phone. She said she would only talk in person. Which daughter-in-law? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jason was not married. He had never been married. The only daughter-in-law I had was Ryan's wife. Megan Cole, Brennan said. Megan. I had known her for 12 years, since Ryan brought her to Thanksgiving dinner the year they started dating. She was a kindergarten teacher from Naperville. Quiet, careful with her words. Diane had loved her immediately and had told me once that Megan was the best thing Ryan had ever done. They had 2 children, Emma, who was 9, and Lucas, who was 7. I had seen Megan at Diane's funeral. She had stood at the back of the church, holding Emma's hand, and she had not cried. At the time, I thought she was being strong for the children. Now I wondered if she had known something even then. What does she want? I asked. She says she has recordings, Brennan said, of conversations between Ryan and Jason. Recent ones. From the last 2 weeks. Patricia put her pen down. If Megan has independent recordings made after Diane's death, that gives us current evidence of ongoing conspiracy. It is not just about what they did. It is about what they are still planning. Brennan picked up his coat. I am going to meet her at the precinct in 1 hour. Martin, you stay here. If her information is solid, I will bring her to Patricia's office tomorrow. I nodded. I sat at the conference table, surrounded by spreadsheets and bank statements, the paper trail of 2 sons who had turned our family into an accounting ledger where their mother's life was just another line item to be balanced and closed. Brennan paused at the door. Martin, if Megan is willing to testify, this case changes. Right now, we have a dead woman's evidence. If we add a living witness from inside the family, your sons have nowhere left to hide. He left. Patricia began filing the documents. Sandra packed her briefcase, and I sat alone in that 14th floor office, watching the December light fade over the Chicago River, thinking about Megan standing at the back of that church, not crying, holding my granddaughter's hand, carrying a secret I was only now beginning to understand. Megan Cole arrived at Patricia's office the following morning at 10:15. I had not seen her since Diane's funeral 8 months earlier. And the woman who walked through the door was not the same woman I remembered. She had lost weight. Her face was drawn, and there were shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of sleep could explain. She wore a plain coat over a sweater, and she carried a small backpack instead of a purse. She looked like someone who had packed in a hurry and was not sure she would be going home. She saw me and stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she crossed the room, put her arms around me, and held on. She did not cry. She pressed her forehead against my shoulder and whispered, "I am sorry, Martin. I should have come sooner." I held her the way I would have held my own daughter if I had ever had one. Diane had always said Megan was the daughter she never got. Watching her stand in that office, thin and exhausted, carrying whatever she had been carrying alone for months, I understood why Diane had loved her. Patricia offered Megan a chair. Brennan closed the door. Sandra Wen was not present. This meeting was about testimony, not numbers. "Megan," Patricia said gently, "Detective Brennan told me you have recordings. Before we discuss those, I want you to understand something. Anything you share in this room can and likely will be used in a criminal prosecution. If you are willing to proceed, I need your informed consent." Megan nodded. "I understand. I have understood for a long time. I just did not know who to trust." She unzipped the backpack and pulled out a phone. Not her regular phone, she explained. A prepaid device she had purchased 3 months ago from a store in Evanston, paying cash. She had begun recording Ryan's phone calls whenever he spoke with Jason in the house, usually late at night after the children were asleep. She had also recorded 2 face-to-face conversations when Jason visited their home in Oak Park. "I have 11 recordings," Megan said. "The earliest is from September. The most recent is from 4 days ago." Brennan placed a digital recorder on the table. "Play the one you think is most important." Megan scrolled through the files and selected one dated November 28th. She set the phone on the table and pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the room. It was late. I could hear the faint hum of a refrigerator in the background and the occasional creak of a chair. "Jason, the old man is getting sentimental. He keeps talking about the ring. He keeps saying he wants to take it somewhere, to get it cleaned or appraised or whatever. If he takes that ring to anyone who knows what they are looking at, we are finished." Jason's voice came through next. Calm and measured, the way it always was. "Then we make sure he does not take it anywhere. Visit him this weekend. Offer to take it yourself. Tell him you will handle it. And if he says no, then we move to the backup. The gas line is already loosened. If something happens to the house with him inside it, the investigation stops. No one looks at a dead man's jewelry." There was a pause. Then Ryan spoke again. Quieter this time. "I do not want to do this, Jason. You did not want to do the last one either. But you did. And it worked. Do not lose your nerve now." The recording ended. The room was silent. Patricia had stopped writing. Brennan's jaw was set in a hard line. I sat in my chair and felt the floor tilt beneath me the way it does in dreams when the ground opens and there is nothing below. My sons had discussed killing me with the same tone they might use to discuss replacing a water heater. Megan looked at me. "Martin, that conversation happened the night before Jason went to your house and loosened the gas line. I heard them through the bedroom wall. Ryan thought I was asleep. I recorded it on the prepaid phone under my pillow." "Why did you not call the police then?" Brennan asked. There was no accusation in his voice. It was a procedural question, the kind he needed answered for the record. "Because I was afraid," Megan said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She pressed them flat against the table to keep them still. "Ryan has never hit me, but in the last year, he has become someone I do not recognize. He checks my phone. He tracks my car. He monitors the bank account daily. After Diane died, he told me that if I ever talked to anyone about family finances, He would take the children, and I would never see them again. I believed him. She paused and took a breath. Diane knew. Before she died, she called me one afternoon when Ryan was at work. She told me to be careful. She said she had found things that worried her, and she asked me to watch and listen. She did not tell me what she had found. I think she was trying to protect me. But after the funeral, I started paying attention. I heard the phone calls. I heard the arguments between Ryan and Jason about money. I heard Petrov's name, and then I heard them talk about Martin and the ring and the gas line, and I knew I could not stay silent anymore. Patricia leaned forward. Megan, the 11 recordings you have, do any of them reference Diane's death directly? 3 of them do. In one, Ryan tells Jason that the insurance company has not followed up, which means the policy is clean. In another, Jason mentions that the medical examiner never ordered a toxicology screen, so there is no trail. And in the third, which is from 2 weeks ago, Ryan says he needs to find a way to access the trust before Martin changes the beneficiaries. Brennan made a note. Megan, are you willing to testify in court about what you heard and what you recorded? Yes, she said, without hesitation. But I need protection for my children. Emma is 9. Lucas is 7. They cannot be in that house if Ryan is arrested there. We will arrange that, Patricia said. Brennan's team will coordinate with Child Protective Services and place Emma and Lucas with a temporary guardian before any arrest is made. You have my word. Megan looked at me again. Her eyes were red but dry. Martin, Diane was the only person in that family who ever made me feel safe. When she died, I lost the only ally I had. I am doing this for her, and I am doing this for Emma and Lucas, because I will not raise my children in a house built on what their father did. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. It was the only thing I could think to do. Words were not enough. Nothing I could say would match what this woman had carried alone for months, while sleeping next to the man who had helped murder my wife and planned to murder me. Diane would be proud of you, I said. Megan closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked at Brennan. What happens next? Brennan stood. Next, we plan the arrest. Both of them. At the same time. And we do it before Christmas. Patricia checked her calendar. December 19th. 6 days away. Christmas Eve, Brennan said. They will both be at Martin's house for dinner. It is the one night we know exactly where they will be. Megan's face went pale. You want to arrest them on Christmas Eve? I want to arrest them when they are together, in a controlled environment, with no warning and no escape, Brennan said. Christmas Eve gives us that. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the first snow of December had begun to fall over the Chicago River, soft and white, covering the city in something that looked like peace, but was not. On the morning of December 23rd, Detective Brennan drove me back to my house on Maple Street. I had not been there in nearly 2 weeks. The front porch light had burned out while I was gone, and a thin layer of snow covered the steps. The newspaper I had never canceled was piled in a wet stack by the door. From the outside, the house looked like what it was. A place where an old man lived alone and was slowly forgetting to take care of things. Brennan's technician had already repaired the gas line and installed 3 concealed recording devices inside the house. One in the living room, mounted inside the smoke detector. One in the kitchen, embedded in the underside of the cabinet above the sink. And one in the hallway, tucked behind a framed photograph of Diane and me at Lake Michigan in the summer of 1994. The photograph showed us laughing, our hair blown sideways by the wind, our arms around each other. I had looked at that photograph every day for 30 years without really seeing it. Now, it had a microphone behind it. Brennan also gave me a device he called a panic button. It was a small black disc, no larger than a coat button, that I was to carry in my left pocket at all times. If I pressed it, a silent signal would be sent to the surveillance van parked 2 blocks away on Kedzie Avenue. Officers would be at my door within 90 seconds. Do not press it unless you feel physically threatened, Brennan said. We want them to talk first. The more they say inside that house, the stronger the case. But if anything goes wrong, you press that button and you get to the front door. We will handle the rest. I practiced pressing it 3 times. Each time, Brennan confirmed the signal reached the van. The disc felt small in my pocket, almost weightless. But knowing it was there gave me something I had not felt in weeks. Not courage exactly, something closer to steadiness. That afternoon, I called Ryan. It was the first time I had spoken to him since before I went to the safe house. I had rehearsed the call with Patricia, who sat beside me and listened on a second line. My voice had to sound normal. Tired, maybe. Lonely, but normal. Ryan, I said. I have been thinking. This will be the first Christmas without your mother. I do not want to spend it alone. Would you and Jason come to the house on Christmas Eve? Just the 3 of us. The way it used to be. There was a pause. I heard him breathe. Then he said, Of course, Dad. We will be there. What time? 6 o'clock. I will make her pot roast. The one she always made. That sounds good, Dad. That sounds real good. He hung up. Patricia removed her earpiece and wrote something on her legal pad. She did not tell me what it said, but her expression was the expression of a woman who had just heard a man agree to walk into a trap without knowing it. I called Jason next. The conversation was shorter. Jason said he would be there. He asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. He said he would bring wine. I said that would be nice. We hung up. 2 calls. 4 minutes total. 2 sons confirmed for Christmas Eve dinner at the house where their mother had died on the kitchen floor while one of them watched. The rest of December 23rd was preparation. Brennan's team ran a final check on all recording devices. Patricia reviewed the arrest warrants with the state's attorney. A Child Protective Services officer met Megan at a location I was not told about and arranged for Emma and Lucas to stay with Megan's sister in Naperville beginning on the morning of December 24th. The children were told it was an early Christmas visit. They did not ask questions. Children that age trust the adults around them to make the world make sense, even when it does not. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I woke at 5. The house was cold. I had not turned the heat up because I wanted it to feel the way it always felt when Diane was alive. She kept the thermostat at 64 and wore a sweater instead. I put on one of her cardigans, the gray one from the videos, because it still smelled faintly of the lavender lotion she used on her hands. I went to the kitchen and began preparing the pot roast. Diane's recipe was written on an index card taped inside the cabinet door. The ink faded from years of steam and splatter. Chuck roast, carrots, potatoes, onions, garlic, a cup of red wine, a sprig of rosemary from the garden that was now covered in snow. I followed each step the way she had taught me. Slowly, with attention, as though the food itself were a kind of ceremony. By noon, the roast was in the oven. The house smelled like Christmas. It smelled like 40 years of marriage and Sunday dinners, and the sound of boys running through the hallway in socks. It smelled like Diane. I set the dining table for 3. I used the good plates, the white ones with the thin gold rim that Diane had bought at an estate sale in Wicker Park, the year we moved into this house. I placed the napkins the way she always did, folded into triangles. Tucked under the forks, I put a candle in the center of the table, the tall white one we had never lit because Diane said she was saving it for a special occasion. Elite. At 4 o'clock, Brennan called the prepaid phone. Surveillance is in position. Van, on Kedzie. 2 plainclothes officers on foot, 1 at each end of the block. Unmarked car in the alley behind your house. We have eyes on every entrance. Are you ready? Yes, I said. Remember, let them talk. Ask about their mother. Ask about the family. If the conversation turns to the trust or the insurance or the house, Follow it. Do not push. Let them come to it naturally, and keep your hand near your left pocket. I hung up. I checked the panic button. I straightened the napkins. I looked at the photograph on the hallway wall, the one with the microphone behind it, and I spoke to Diane the way I had spoken to her every night for 8 months. I am ready, I said. At 5:45, headlights appeared at the end of Maple Street. A car pulled into the driveway. Then a second car, right behind it. Ryan stepped out first. He was carrying a bottle of wine. Jason followed, hands in his coat pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. They walked up the porch steps together, side by side, the way they had walked into this house 1,000 times before. Ryan knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for me to answer, the way he always did. "Dad," he said. "Merry Christmas." I stood in the hallway with Diane's candle burning behind me and the panic button in my left pocket and 40 years of fatherhood pressing down on my chest like a stone. "Merry Christmas, boys," I said. "Come in. Dinner is almost ready." They stepped inside. I closed the door, and somewhere on Kedzie Avenue, a man in a surveillance van pressed a button and began recording. We sat at the dining table the way we had sat there 100 times before. Ryan at the end nearest the kitchen. Jason across from me, the pot roast in the center, steam rising. The smell of rosemary filling the room. Diane's white candle flickered between us, casting small shadows on the gold-rimmed plates. Ryan poured the wine. He had brought a Cabernet from a shop in Oak Park. Jason said nothing. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, watching me the way he always watched me, as though he were calculating something behind his eyes. "Dad, you look tired," Ryan said. "Have you been sleeping?" "Not much," I said. "The house is quiet without her." "You should think about selling," Jason said. "This place is too big for one person." We ate in near silence. Ryan complimented the roast. Jason cut his meat into small, precise squares, the way he had done since he was a boy. I watched them and thought about the videos. Ryan at the refrigerator, pouring a clear liquid into the pitcher. Jason at the laptop, deleting 7 days of footage. Their voices on the phone, dividing the work of killing their mother like items on a checklist. "I have been going through some of your mother's things," I said. I kept my voice even. Conversational. "You should let us help with that," Ryan said. I found some papers I did not understand. Insurance documents. Trust statements. Some of the numbers did not match what Jason showed us at the quarterly meetings. The room changed. Jason's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Ryan's hand moved to his wine glass but did not lift it. "What do you mean?" Jason said. His voice was still calm, but the calm had a different quality now. I mean, there were withdrawals I did not recognize. Payments to a company I had never heard of. Lakefront Advisory Group. Jason set his fork down. "Dad, those are routine trust management fees. There were a lot of them. Over 3 years. Ryan looked at Jason. Jason did not look back. He looked at me, and for the first time that evening, I saw something behind his eyes that was not calculation. It was fear. "Dad," Ryan said, "this is Christmas Eve. Let us not talk about finances tonight." "You are right," I said. "I have just been thinking a lot since your mother passed. About her last few weeks. She had a checkup in January, and everything was fine. 3 months later, she was dead." The candle flickered. Diane's photograph on the wall looked down at us. And behind it, the microphone recorded every breath. "Dad, the doctors explained all of this," Jason said. "Sometimes these things happen quickly. That is what I told myself for 8 months. And then I found something. Both of them were still now." Ryan's wine glass was untouched. Jason's hands were flat on the table. "I took your mother's wedding ring to Frank Bellini's shop. He found something inside the stone. Something your mother put there." Ryan stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Sit down, Ryan." He did not sit down. He stood at the end of the table with his knuckles white against the chair. I am talking about the micro SD card your mother hid inside a synthetic diamond. The videos she recorded from the bonsai camera. The audio files. The phone calls. The 15-page letter. The room was so quiet I could hear the snow falling against the window. She saw everything, I said. She recorded Ryan pouring ethylene glycol into her juice on March 28th. She recorded Jason deleting the security footage that same night. She recorded both of you on the phone, planning it, discussing how long it would take for her kidneys to fail. Jason's face had gone white. The color of paper. Ryan's voice came out broken. Dad, that is not what happened. Then explain it to me. I looked at my oldest son and asked the question I had carried since the morning I sat in Frank Bellini's shop. What did you put in your mother's juice, Ryan? Ryan did not answer. He looked at Jason. Jason looked at the table. And in that silence, I pressed the panic button. 3 seconds passed. Then the front door opened without a knock. Brennan came through first, followed by 4 uniformed officers. They moved through the hallway with a precision that told me they had rehearsed this. Ryan Thomas Cole. Jason Michael Cole. You are under arrest for the murder of Diane Margaret Cole. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Ryan backed against the wall, hands up, palms open. Jason did not move. He sat in his chair with his eyes closed, as though he had been waiting for this moment longer than any of us knew. The officers placed handcuffs on both of them. As they were led through the hallway, past the photograph of Diane and me at Lake Michigan, past the microphone that had recorded everything, Jason turned his head and looked at me. He did not speak, but his eyes said he was sorry. And they said it was not enough. The front door closed. The house was empty. The candle Diane had saved for a special occasion was still burning on the dining table, its flame steady and small in the quiet room. I sat down and looked at the 3 plates, the pot roast going cold, the wine Ryan had poured and never finished. I looked at the candle and thought about the woman who had bought it and never lit it because she was always waiting for the right moment. This was the moment, and she was not here to see it. The exhumation took place on the morning of December 27th, 3 days after the arrest. I was not there. Brennan told me it would be better if I stayed at the safe house, and Patricia agreed. They said it was a legal precaution that my presence at the gravesite could be used by the defense to argue emotional contamination of the process. I understood what they meant, but what they were really saying was that no man should have to watch his wife's coffin pulled from the earth in the middle of winter. I learned the details later, in Patricia's office, from a woman named Dr. Helen Marsh. She was the forensic pathologist assigned to the case by the Cook County Medical Examiner. She was in her late 50s, with short gray hair and a voice that carried the careful neutrality of someone who had spent decades speaking about death without letting it speak through her. She sat across from me with a folder open on her lap and explained what she had found as though she were reading from a textbook, which I suppose in some ways she was. "Mr. Cole," she said, "your wife's body was exhumed at 7:45 in the morning and transported to the county forensic facility. I performed a full post-mortem examination, including tissue sampling from the kidneys, liver, and brain. I also collected vitreous humor from the eyes and residual fluid from the pericardial sac." She paused. "Not for effect, but to give me time." I nodded. The kidneys showed extensive damage consistent with toxic nephropathy. Under microscopic examination, I identified dense deposits of calcium oxalate crystals in the renal tubules. These crystals are a direct metabolic byproduct of ethylene glycol. Their presence in this concentration is not consistent with any natural disease process. It is consistent with repeated ingestion of ethylene glycol over a period of approximately 3 to 4 weeks. She turned a page in her folder. The liver showed secondary damage consistent with the same toxic exposure. The vitreous humor tested positive for glycolic acid, another metabolite of ethylene glycol, at a level of 47 milligrams per deciliter. For reference, Any level above 20 milligrams per deciliter is considered diagnostic of ethylene glycol poisoning. In your professional opinion, Patricia asked, what was the cause of death? Acute renal failure secondary to ethylene glycol poisoning, Dr. Marsh said. The original death certificate listed acute renal failure of unknown etiology. That diagnosis was not wrong, but it was incomplete. The underlying cause was poisoning. I have amended the cause of death and reclassified the manner of death from natural to homicide. The word sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Homicide. I had known it was coming. I had watched the videos. I had read Diane's letter, but hearing a medical professional say the word in a quiet office on a December afternoon made it real in a way that evidence on a screen never could. My wife had been murdered. The science confirmed it. There was no ambiguity left. Brennan, who had been standing by the window, spoke next. The toxicology results give us the physical evidence we needed. Combined with the video, the audio recordings, Diane's letter, Megan's testimony, and the financial trail, the prosecution case is now built on 5 independent pillars. Any one of them could be challenged individually. Together, they are overwhelming. Patricia made a note. What about the source of the ethylene glycol? Brennan opened his own folder. We traced it. Ryan purchased 12 gallons of industrial-grade antifreeze from a wholesale supplier on the west side between January and March of 2024. The supplier is a man named Victor Slade. He operates a chemical distribution business out of a warehouse near Cicero Avenue. Slade sold the antifreeze under the table. No invoice, no receipt, cash payment. We know this because Slade's warehouse was under surveillance by the DEA for an unrelated investigation involving solvent sales to methamphetamine producers. The DEA shared their footage with us as part of an interagency cooperation agreement. The footage shows Ryan entering the warehouse on 3 separate occasions and leaving with containers consistent with antifreeze packaging. Has Slade been arrested? Patricia asked. This morning, Brennan said. He is being held on charges of accessory to murder and unlicensed chemical distribution. His attorney has already indicated that Slade is willing to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. Slade claims he did not know what Ryan intended to do with the antifreeze, but he acknowledges the off-the-books sale. And Petrov? I asked. Brennan turned to me. Niko Petrov was arrested last night at his apartment on the northwest side. He is being charged with extortion, unlicensed lending, and conspiracy to commit murder. The conspiracy charge is based on the audio recording from Diane's micro-SD, in which Petrov directly pressured Ryan to obtain money quickly, and on Megan's recordings, in which Ryan references Petrov's threats as a motivating factor. Petrov's attorney has not yet indicated whether he will cooperate. Dr. Marsh closed her folder and stood. Mr. Cole, I want you to know something. In my 30 years of forensic work, I have rarely seen a victim build a case as thorough as your wife did. The micro-SD evidence, the letter, the hidden camera, all of it was organized with a precision that most investigators would envy. She knew exactly what would be needed to prove what was done to her, and she made sure it existed. She was remarkable. I thanked her. She shook my hand and left the room. Brennan followed her out to coordinate with the state's attorney. Patricia and I sat alone in the office. The Chicago River was gray outside the window. The December light was thin and pale, the kind of light that makes everything look like a photograph taken a long time ago. Martin, Patricia said, the grand jury will convene in January. Based on what we have, I expect indictments on first-degree murder for both Ryan and Jason, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and structuring of financial transactions. Additional charges may follow depending on what Slade and Petrov provide. What about the trial? I asked. It will take time. 6 months to a year. Possibly longer. The defense will file motions to suppress the micro-SD evidence. They will challenge chain of custody. Ryan's attorney has already hinted at an insanity defense. Jason's attorney may try to argue diminished participation. But the evidence is strong, Martin. Your wife made sure of that. I stood and walked to the window. Below me, the river moved the way it always moved. Slow and gray, and indifferent to the things that happened along its banks. Diane had loved that river. She had said it reminded her that the world keeps going even when you think it should stop. She did not do this for revenge, I said quietly. She did it because she loved me, and she wanted me to know the truth. Patricia did not respond. Some things do not require a response. They only require someone to hear them. I put on my coat and walked out of the office, past the receptionist, into the elevator, and out onto LaSalle Street. The air was cold and sharp and tasted like snow. Somewhere in the Cook County Jail, my 2 sons were sitting in separate cells, waiting for lawyers who could not undo what science had just confirmed. Their mother was murdered. And now the whole world would know. The trial began on the 14th of June, nearly 6 months after the arrests. It was held at the Layton Criminal Court building on South California Avenue, a place I had driven past 1,000 times without ever imagining I would walk through its doors as a witness in the murder trial of my own sons. The courtroom was large and cold and smelled like old wood and floor polish. The gallery was full every day. Reporters from 3 Chicago television stations sat in the front rows. Neighbors from Maple Street sat in the back. Frank Bellini came on the first day and every day after. He sat in the 3rd row, his hands folded in his lap, his face still and watchful. He never spoke to the press. He never left early. He stayed until the judge dismissed the gallery, and then he walked out without looking at anyone. Patricia had warned me that the defense would be aggressive. She was right. Ryan's attorney, a man named Gerald Hoff from a downtown firm, built his case on 2 arguments. First, that the micro SD evidence had been improperly handled because it passed through a civilian jeweler before reaching law enforcement. Second, that Ryan suffered from a gambling addiction that constituted a mental illness, rendering him incapable of forming the specific intent required for first-degree murder. The judge denied the motion to suppress the micro SD evidence on the grounds that Frank Bellini had acted as a discoverer, not an investigator, and that Detective Brennan had established proper chain of custody within hours of the discovery. The insanity defense was allowed to proceed to the jury, but Patricia told me privately that it was unlikely to succeed. Addiction, she said, is not the same as insanity under Illinois law. And the level of planning demonstrated by the evidence showed clear, deliberate intent. Jason's attorney took a different approach. She argued diminished participation, claiming Jason had acted under Ryan's influence and pressure. She presented Jason as a younger brother who had followed rather than led, who had been drawn into a scheme he did not initiate. It was a strategy designed to separate Jason from Ryan in the jury's mind, to make him look smaller, less dangerous, more worthy of mercy. The prosecution's case took 4 weeks to present. The jury saw the videos from the bonsai camera. They heard the audio recordings. They read Diane's 15-page letter projected on a screen, each line magnified so that her handwriting filled the wall like a voice speaking from beyond the grave. They heard Dr. Helen Marsh explain the calcium oxalate crystals and the glycolic acid levels. They heard Sandra Wen trace the $814,000 through Lakefront Advisory Group. They heard Megan Cole describe the night she lay in bed with a phone under her pillow, recording her husband and his brother discussing whether to kill their father with a gas leak. I testified on the 3rd day. Patricia had prepared me for hours, but nothing prepares you for sitting in a witness box 12 feet from your sons and telling a room full of strangers how they murdered your wife. I described finding the ring. I described the videos. I described reading Diane's letter in Frank's shop while the clock on the wall ticked and the city moved outside the window as though nothing had changed. I described the Christmas Eve dinner, the pot roast, the candle, the question I asked Ryan that he could not answer. When Gerald Hoff cross-examined me, he asked if I had ever considered that Diane might have been mistaken, that the videos might have an innocent explanation, that the liquid Ryan poured could have been something harmless. My wife was a careful woman, I said. She tested the juice herself. She found ethylene glycol. She hid evidence inside her own wedding ring because she knew she was dying and she wanted the truth to survive her. She was not mistaken. Hoff did not ask another question. On the 19th day of the trial, Jason's attorney requested a meeting with the prosecution. Patricia called me that evening. Jason wants to make a statement, she said. His attorney has advised against it, but Jason has overruled her. He wants to address the court. The next morning, Jason stood in the courtroom. He was thinner than he had been at Christmas. His suit hung loose on his shoulders. His hands were steady, but his voice was not. I helped my brother kill our mother, he said. I deleted the security footage. I waited 10 minutes before calling 911 on the morning she collapsed, because Ryan told me to wait. I managed the trust money that funded the insurance premiums on the forged policy. I knew what the liquid was. I knew what it would do. And I did nothing to stop it. He paused. The courtroom was silent. My mother called me 3 days before she died. She asked me to come to the house. She made me tea. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said she loved me. She said she would always love me no matter what. I believe she already knew what I had done, and she loved me anyway. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. I am sorry, Dad. I know that is not enough, but it is all I have. He sat down. His attorney placed a hand on his arm. Jason did not move. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On the afternoon of July 11th, they returned. The foreman stood and read the verdicts. Ryan Thomas Cole, guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of insurance fraud. Guilty of forgery. Jason Michael Cole, guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of embezzlement. Guilty of obstruction of justice. Ryan showed no reaction. He stood with his hands at his sides, staring straight ahead, as though he had left his body and was watching from somewhere far away. Jason lowered his head and pressed his palms against the table. The sentencing came 3 weeks later. Ryan received life without the possibility of parole. Jason received 45 years with the possibility of parole after 30, a reduction the judge attributed to his voluntary confession and cooperation. Victor Slade received 12 years for accessory to murder. Niko Petrov received 8 years for extortion and conspiracy. After the sentencing, Patricia handed me a small velvet box. Inside was Diane's wedding ring. The forensic lab had returned it after completing their analysis of the micro SD card. The synthetic stone was back in its setting. The card still inside, sealed again in resin. Everything Diane had hidden was still there, preserved exactly as she had intended. I held the ring in my palm. It was warm from Patricia's hand. I closed my fingers around it and pressed it against my chest. "Thank you," I said. Patricia nodded. "Diane built this case, Martin. We just carried it across the finish line." I walked out of the Layton Criminal Court building into the July heat. The sun was bright, and the sidewalk was crowded with people who did not know me and did not know what had happened inside those walls. I stood on the steps and held my wife's ring and let the warmth of the afternoon settle on my shoulders like a hand. It was over. And it was just beginning. The spring came slowly to Chicago that year, the way it always does. Reluctant and gray at first, then suddenly green, as though the city had been holding its breath all winter, and finally exhaled. By late March, the snow had melted on Maple Street, and the ground in the backyard was soft enough to dig. I started with the oak tree. Diane had planted it the year Ryan was born, 44 years ago, when we were young and the house was new, and the future was something we talked about as though it belonged to us. The tree had grown tall and wide, its branches reaching over the back fence into the neighbor's yard. I cleared the dead leaves from around its base and turned the soil with a spade I found in the garage, the same spade Diane had used every spring for as long as I could remember. I did not plan the garden. I just began. I put in tomatoes where Diane had always put tomatoes, along the south-facing fence where the sun hit longest. I planted basil next to them because Diane said they grew better together, the way some people do. I added marigolds along the border, the orange ones she liked, and a row of sunflowers near the back wall, because she had always said sunflowers made a garden look like it was smiling. Frank Bellini came by on a Saturday morning in April. He brought a small ceramic pot with a rosemary plant inside. He set it on the porch railing and said, "Diane told me once that rosemary means remembrance. I thought your garden should have some." I planted it near the kitchen window, beside the bonsai tree that was still sitting on the sill. The bonsai's camera had been removed by Brennan's forensic team during the investigation, but the tree itself was alive. Diane had taken care of it for years, trimming it with small scissors, turning it toward the light. I had continued watering it after she died. Not because I knew how to care for bonsai, but because letting it die felt like losing another piece of her. It was still green. It was still growing. Some things carry on even when the person who tended them is gone. Megan brought Emma and Lucas to the house in May. It was the first time I had seen my grandchildren since before the trial. Emma was 10 now. She had grown taller and quieter, and she looked at me with eyes that understood more than a 10-year-old should have to understand. Lucas was 8. He ran into the backyard and asked if he could help with the garden. I gave him the spade and showed him how to dig a hole for a tomato plant, the way I had shown Ryan and Jason when they were his age, before the world became what it became. Megan stood on the porch and watched. She looked healthier than she had in December. She had moved to Naperville permanently, into a small house near her sister. She was teaching again. She told me the children were in therapy, and that Emma had started drawing pictures of Diane. Memories she said she did not want to forget. Megan had framed one and hung it in their kitchen. It showed a woman with brown hair standing in a garden, holding a watering can, smiling. "She asks about you," Megan said. "She wants to come here more often." "She can come whenever she wants," I said. This is still her grandmother's house. Patricia Okafor called me in late April to tell me the Chicago Community Care Foundation had received the first disbursement from Diane's trust, 90% of $2.8 million. The foundation used a portion of the funds to establish a program for elderly victims of family financial abuse. They named it the Diane Cole Initiative. Patricia said there would be a small ceremony in June if I wanted to attend. I said I would. Detective Brennan stopped by once, in early May. He was off duty, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, looking like a different person without the sport coat and the badge. He stood in the backyard and looked at the garden and said, "She would have liked this. She would have told me the sunflowers were too close together," I said. He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile. I wore Diane's ring on a chain around my neck. I could not wear it on my finger because it was not my size, and I did not want to resize it because the synthetic stone was still inside. The micro SD card still sealed in resin. The evidence had been copied and entered into the court record, but the original was still in the ring, where Diane had placed it. I wanted it to stay there. It was not just evidence. It was the last thing she had touched with the intention of saving my life. Some evenings I sat on the porch and watched the light change over the garden. The tomatoes grew tall. The basil spread. The marigolds bloomed bright and steady. The way Diane had done everything. Without fuss. Without noise. Just a quiet insistence on being alive. The rosemary Frank had brought filled the air near the kitchen window with a scent that made me close my eyes and think of Sunday dinners and the sound of her voice calling me to the table. I thought about forgiveness sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. I thought about Jason's face in the courtroom when he said he was sorry. I thought about Ryan standing against the wall on Christmas Eve with his hands up, the confidence gone from his eyes, replaced by something smaller and more frightened than I had ever seen in him. They were my sons. They would always be my sons. But they had made choices that no amount of love could undo. And I had made the choice to let the truth be told, even though the truth dismantled everything I thought my family was. Diane had known this would happen. She had known the cost, and she had decided that the truth was worth more than the silence that would have kept us all comfortable and blind. I understood now what she meant in her letter when she wrote that silence is not loyalty. Silence is what allows the people you love to destroy you while you stand by and call it family. The truth is harder. The truth breaks things that cannot be repaired. But the truth is also the only foundation strong enough to build something new on. I was 67 years old. I had lost my wife. I had lost my sons. I had lost the version of my life I thought I was living. But I had gained something I did not expect. I had gained clarity, and with clarity came a kind of freedom I had not felt in years. The freedom to stop pretending and start again. On a warm evening in late May, I sat on the porch with a glass of water and watched Emma and Lucas playing in the garden. Lucas was watering the tomatoes with a green hose, spraying more water on himself than on the plants. Emma was kneeling beside the sunflowers, drawing them in a sketchbook. The light was golden and low, the way it gets in Chicago in the hour before sunset, when the whole city looks like it has been dipped in honey. I held Diane's ring through my shirt and whispered her name the way I had done every night for over a year. Then I let go. Not of her. Never of her. But of the weight. The grief. The question of what I could have done differently. I let it go the way the Chicago River lets go of everything the city gives it. Carrying it forward. Not holding it. Not fighting it. Just moving towards something bigger. The garden was growing. The children were laughing. The ring was warm against my chest, and somewhere, I believed, Diane was watching. Not from the bonsai camera on the kitchen windowsill. Not from a micro SD card hidden inside a synthetic diamond. But from whatever place love goes when it outlives the body that carried it. She was watching. And she was proud. If this story moved you, I ask one thing. Look around you. Look at the people you trust. And remember that silence is not loyalty. Truth is the final act of love.